Hello everybody, it's Tanya and welcome to today's video. Today's video is going to be my review of The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So I'm holding up my Russian copy. This is one of a few English copies. I have recently finished reading it. It took me a few months to finish. I have very conflicting feelings about this book. I don't really know how I feel about it. I definitely think that it's a very interesting work. When I was reading it, at the same time I was reading about it and how it was written, what was the process of Dostoevsky when he was writing this novel, what influences this novel had, and what ideas and thoughts he had for this novel. And with that background, when you read more about this novel and you read more about him as an author, like, it gives this novel a whole new dimension. I think I will make a separate video about that, about how he wrote this novel, because it's really interesting. There are letters that he was exchanging with his publisher and his friends and one of his favorite nieces, and it really does give a new perspective on the novel. But today's video is just going to be a review of this novel. So first of all, let's start with the title. The word idiot has kind of three meanings. So the first one is, the obvious one, is our current meaning that we currently use this word in, which is a fool, right? Князь Мышкин himself calls himself an idiot sometimes, and characters about him are constantly calling him an idiot. So this would be the obvious, I guess, source of the title, what other characters are calling him and how he looks in the society. He looks like a fool who doesn't understand the rules of the society, who cannot fit into the society. So that's the first obvious meaning. Another meaning is actually a medical one, which comes from medicine. Idiocy as a condition. Well, currently we don't really call it idiocy, right? So currently there are more politically correct expressions for that, and the word idiot and idiocy are not really used in the professional sphere, but it is a medical term as well. So it's the worst form of oligophrenia. Oligophrenia is a term for less than normal mental development, and idiocy is like the worst form of oligophrenia. In case of the second definition, it doesn't really fit completely. It can fit in certain parts of the novel. And the last meaning, the third, the most interesting meaning, would be coming from ancient Greek. In ancient Greek, the word idiotes meant someone whose day-to-day life was not affected by or had very little connection to the social life, to the political life of the city. Idiocy was ultimately equivalent of privacy, and it was essentially the opposite of citizenship. So in this case, when you look at the novel from this perspective, it does actually fit, because Князь Мышкин, he is so far away from the society, so he is so far away from all the political and social spheres of life. These three meanings of the word idiocy and idiot, I think, actually do give like interesting perspectives on the novel and on the character of Князь Мышкин. Now let's talk about the influences and other books that inspired The Idiot. One of the most obvious, I guess, influences would be the figure of Jesus Christ. If you start searching information on The Idiot on the internet, you will for sure, at least like in Russian sources, everybody mentions this quote, and I found this quote also in Oxford edition introduction to The Idiot. So I will read it for you. It's a quote from a letter that Dostoevsky wrote to his niece Sonia, and in this quote he talks about his idea for the novel and what he tried to do with it. So the quote goes: "The main idea of the novel is to depict the positively good man. There is nothing more difficult than this in the world, especially nowadays. All writers, not only ours, but European ones too, who have set about depicting the positively good, have always shirked the task. It's because this is a task that is immeasurable. The good is an ideal, and neither we nor civilized Europe have yet succeeded in working out such an ideal for ourselves. There is only one positively good man in the world, and that is Christ. The appearance of this immeasurably infinitely good figure is therefore in itself an infinite miracle. Of all the good figures in Christian literature, Don Quixote is the most complete, but he is good only because he is at the same time ridiculous. Dickens's Pickwick, an infinitely weaker conception than Don Quixote, but still immense, is also comic and succeeds because of this. Sympathy is aroused for the good man who is ridiculed and who doesn't know his own worth, and this sympathy is aroused in the reader too. This arousing of sympathy is the secret of humor. I have nothing of the kind, absolutely nothing, and therefore I'm terribly afraid that my novel will be a positive failure." So in this quote from the introduction in the Oxford edition, I will not be showing you because I feel like this picture is terrifying. I will be better showing you Russian edition. So from this quote you can already see three influences. He mentions the figure of Jesus Christ, of course, as being the only absolutely positive man. And actually, in his notes when he was writing the novel, just as an orienteer, in the novel itself, he never mentions it, he never draws this comparison directly, but I read that in his notes when he was writing the novel, he had this phrase written, Prince Jesus, like Князь Христос in Russian, Князь Христос, Prince Jesus, because it was his orienteer. Jesus Christ, the figure of Jesus Christ, was his guidance for writing the character of Князь Мышкин. But then you also you will remember that he mentions two other characters, which is Don Quixote, which is not surprising because Don Quixote was one of his favorite books of all times. And then of course also Pickwick from Charles Dickens's Pickwick's Papers. And then later on, a person who wrote Dostoevsky's biography, one of his biographies, Leonid Grossman. He was a scholar in Russia and he wrote Dostoevsky's biography. In his biography he mentions also that an important source of inspiration for this book was actually French Romantic literature. Another one of Dostoevsky's favorite books was actually Notre Dame de Paris. And Leonid Grossman also points out that this technique of contrasting grotesque and exaggerated characters with one saint, moral and pure character comes most probably from Hugo's method of romantic antithesis, which he also used in Notre Dame de Paris. Another source of inspiration that Leonid Grossman points out for this novel were novels and stories by Honoré de Balzac, which Dostoevsky also was a fan of, especially when he was a young man in school, and Honoré de Balzac was actually the only French author whom at that time he mentioned in his letters and about whom at that time he was raving. And actually he was even translating Eugenie Grandet by himself into Russian, from French into Russian. So he was really into Honoré Balzac, and Grossman points out that probably works of that writer also influenced him in writing The Idiot. And then the last influence that I want to mention actually comes not from literature, but comes from paintings and from art. In 1867, right around the time when he approximately started writing the novel The Idiot, he was actually abroad with his wife, which I will talk about it, why he was abroad, when I will make the video about how he was writing the novel. But basically he wrote this novel abroad. He was not in Russia when he was writing this novel. When he started, he was at that time in Germany, and in Germany, in a museum, he saw this art piece, this artwork, which is called The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb by Hans Holbein the Younger. And he was impressed by that work. So actually Oxford edition very knowingly put like a piece, it's not the whole work. So they very knowingly put a piece of that artwork on their cover. So that's from that picture. And he saw that picture in the museum, and his wife was remembering that episode, and she said that that art piece produced such a strong impression on Dostoevsky that he almost had an epileptic stroke at that time. It didn't happen, but like it almost happened. That's the how strong of an impression that piece produced on him. And after he saw that, he got also inspired. And yeah, actually you will see a lot of mentioning of this artwork in the novel, and interpretations of this artwork by different characters. So that's really interesting. Now let's talk about the themes of the novel. And I want to talk to you about 5 themes. So the first, the most obvious theme, I think, is that of love. And the main storyline of the novel is the love storyline and the love triangle and love relationship which Knyaz Myshkin is a part of. In one of his letters, I don't remember exactly to whom, I think it was a letter to his niece, again Sonia, Dostoevsky wrote that one of his ideas for the novel was to portray love, but not just like love in its romantic sense, but to portray love in kind of its main variants through the character of Ganya Ivolgin. He portrays love which is kind of vain love, you know, love slash vanity, by creating the character of Rogozhin and his obsession, practically obsession with Nastasia Filipovna. Through the character of Rogozhin, he shows love as passion. And then through the character of Knyaz Myshkin, he shows the Christian love, the pure love, the real love, the true love. So that's love is a topic of the novel. Another very prominent, very obvious, very clear topic which is present pretty much, not maybe on every page, but it's very present in the novel, is the topic of religion and faith, and in particular, of course, Orthodox Christianity, because that's what Dostoevsky believed in, that's what was very important to him, that was part of him, especially after he experienced close to death experience when he was almost executed, but then forgiven at the very last moment and sent off to Siberia. And after his experience in the prison in Siberia, where he was allowed only one book, and that was his New Testament. So after that experience, he became very much into religion. He became very religious person. So I guess it's logical that religion plays a very big part in this novel. And Dostoevsky, actually, unlike many people of the time, he had this idea. So many people of his time believed that in order to achieve a better life, we need better institutions, we need better governmental institutions, better social organization. Dostoevsky believed differently. He believed that in order to achieve a better life, we need better people. And how to improve people, how to make them better. He saw that opportunity in religion. He saw that opportunity in, particularly in Orthodox Christianity. The theme of the religion is also expressed through the character of Knyaz Myshkin, whose biography includes allusions to life of Jesus Christ. He is also given a function of kind of savior in this novel. He tries to save Nastasia Filipovna. He also saves people around him. Through him, they learn forgiveness. Through him, they learn compassion. Through him, they learn pity. And like Olga Sedakova, Russian philologist and Russian literary scholar, she studies literature, she is a poet herself, and she has a very interesting article which is called Failed Epiphany, where she talks about two novels, The Idiot by Dostoevsky and Dr. Zhivago by Pasternak, where she compares these two novels, draws links between these two novels. And so in that novel, in that article, she points out that by the end of the book, we see Knyaz Myshkin. Those of you who have read, you know how the book ends. So in the very end, we see him as a figure who, just like Jesus Christ, suffers for everybody around him, who kind of takes everybody's sins on himself and suffers for people around. So that's the religious topic in the novel. And then one more topic is that, obviously, of vanity. We have, because also one of the objectives of the novel was to show Russian intelligentsia of the time, to show how corrupt it was, to show how rotten it was, how rotten people were, and vanity being one of the main sins of those people. So the main, I guess, representative of this scene was obviously Ganya, Ivolgin, Ganichka, and Dostoevsky wanted to show the corrupting power of vanity and pride. And the last, fifth topic is the topic of people, Russian people, especially in particular intelligentsia, because this novel was also meant to criticize Russian intelligentsia of the time and show how leading double life became a standard, how vanity became a standard, how many people are actually rotten on the inside. So that was the fifth topic of the novel. Now let's talk about how this novel was received after it was finished, and what Dostoevsky himself thought about his novel. Let's start with him himself. Dostoevsky actually was unsatisfied with the novel. He said that he failed to express even 1/10 of the things that he wanted to express with this book. He also said that this novel was ineffective and that it would probably fail to produce any effect on the reader. And he also said that because he was writing it abroad and because he was out of Russia, he said that, like, I lost the knack for writing in Russian. And so that's kind of his own thoughts. He was unsatisfied with the result. And so were other critics and writers of his time. There is this one critic, his name was Nikolai Nikolaevich Strakhov. He was a close friend with Leo Tolstoy, and he was also close and on good terms with Dostoevsky as well. they had very kind of warm relationships with each other. So it's not like the man was hating on him. No, he actually had respect for the writer. It's just that he also didn't really like the end result. So Strachov was actually a philosopher himself. He was a literary critic as well. So he was well known during his time. Later on, he became first biographer of Dostoevsky. He was the first man to write the first biography on Dostoevsky. After he read the first part of The Idiot, because The Idiot was also published in like installments, it wasn't published as a full novel. It was published over the course of a year, I think, in installments. So after Strachov read the first part, he actually was very enthusiastic about the novel. He wrote to Dostoevsky that he didn't find a single drawback or a single bad thing to say about the first part of the novel. But then after he read the rest, that's what he said. I will read it to you. The translation of the quote from Russian into English is mine, so that's why it's going to be not very good. So I apologize for that, bear with me. So basically, in his letter to Dostoevsky from 12th of April 1871, Strachov writes that Dostoevsky was overcomplicating his novels. If the novels were simpler, they would produce stronger effect. For example, The Gambler, Eternal Husband, produced the clearest impression, but everything you put into The Idiot was wasted. So I thought that was interesting, and it actually did resonate with me, like this quote by Strachov. That's also not maybe wasted, but I also, when I was reading this novel, like I said in the beginning, I had quite conflicting feelings. In the beginning, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed every single line, every single character. But then closer to like starting maybe from the second half of the book, I kind of lost that enthusiasm. Some parts felt drugged for me, they felt overwritten for me. At some point I kind of thought to myself that he probably wrote this novel because he had a lot of things to say about like Russian intelligentsia, about just Russian people. He probably had a lot to say and he needed an output for that, and so he put just everything, he just dumped it into the novel. That's how I felt. And certain parts, they, to be honest, bored me. Some episodes were really entertaining and really interesting. There are a lot of characters here that are very well written in my opinion, and some of the characters here I really like. My favorite character is Elizaveta Prokofievna, is the mother of the family. I adore that woman, I love her. However, her daughter Aglaya, for example, I really didn't like. I couldn't imagine her. Like at some points she is like around 17 years old, and at some points she doesn't behave like a 17-year-old, and at some points she behaves like someone even much younger. And I don't know, I didn't like the character of Aglaya, for example. So yeah, this quote by Strachov just really resonated with me. Then we have another critic also talking about The Idiot. This critic's name was Viktor Burenin, and Dostoevsky actually respected the man. He actually considered him the one critic who understood his ideas the best and who understood himself as a writer the best. And this critic, Burenin, also didn't really like The Idiot. I will also give you a quote from the review that he gave on the book. Again, translation will be mine, so again it will not be very good, but I apologize for that. So the quote goes: "People grouping around the Prince Myshkin are, if not idiots themselves, they're at least completely insane. 13-year-old boys in Dostoevsky's novels speak not only like adults, but even in the manner similar to journalists writing articles for newspapers. But adult women and men talk and act like 10-year-old children. It's possible to title the novel not just The Idiot, but Idiots. There would have been no mistake in such a title. So you see, he had problems with the characters in the novel. And I also can see where he's coming from, because characters here are really exaggerated. It makes this novel very dramatic. This novel is actually written in a very theatrical manner. Characters behave very theatrically, they speak very theatrically. Like in theater you have acts, so this novel is also kind of written in acts. Like for example, now they're sitting in this house, and then in next chapter they will be sitting in someone else's house. And it's like, you know, there are very few actually kind of transitions from one scene to another. It's usually like it's written in scenes. So it's very theatrical, and that's why there were so many adaptations in theater and in movies as well of this novel. So yes, even from like these two reviews there will be more. So Saltykov-Shchedrin also didn't really appreciate the novel. Liskov didn't like writing of this novel. He said that like Dostoevsky's writing like in Russian is kind of clumsy. Yeah, the contemporaries of the novel didn't really take it very well, and even during the Silver Age of Russian literature, so beginning of the 20th century, even then the novel wasn't very popular. People were mostly talking about Crime and Punishment and considering Crime and Punishment his best work. And only later this book became like more popular and gaining popularity, I guess, through movies and through theater. Like I said, have conflicting feelings about this novel. I've already said that some characters were hugely enjoyable for me and some scenes were hugely enjoyable for me, and then other scenes would be really dragging and I wouldn't understand why they're there and why they're talking about certain things. They just felt like, you know, like Dostoevsky needed to let things out of his chest and he needed to, you know, express his opinions, and so he expressed them in this novel. There are a lot of good thoughts in this book and interesting thoughts in this book. There are also not very good thoughts in this book. Like he is very much like pro-Russian. He was very much into like Orthodox Christianity, not Catholic Christianity, Orthodox Christianity. Even in the book club when we were reading it, I think one person said that they felt actually uncomfortable reading it was in the end because Knyaz Myshkin talks about Catholicism and he judges Catholicism and he judges European belief and compares it to Orthodox Christianity, and of course Orthodox Christianity for him is the right way and the right religion and stuff like that, and people felt uncomfortable with that. I can totally understand like how it would feel, so I think it's important to be aware of that. But it's also, it comes from the time period, because at that time in Russia we had two main kind of directions of thoughts. So we had Zapadniki и Slavяноphile. So Zapadniki is like pro-Western kind of direction of thought. So people who thought that Russian culture is actually inferior to European culture, and that in order to develop, in order to have like to create a better country and a better state, we need to follow European kind of culture and we need to follow Europe into Europe's footsteps. So for example, one of the representatives was actually Ivan Turgenev. Ivan Turgenev was like very much into like French things, and he spent a lot of time abroad. He was very well off, he was rich, so he had the opportunity. He was Zapadnik, he was pro-Western thinker. And Dostoevsky and Turgenev, they actually didn't have good relationship. They didn't like each other. Yeah, so Dostoevsky had belonged, I guess, more to Slavяноphile. Slavяноphile were people who thought that Russian culture is actually better than European culture, it's the right culture, Russian religion is the right religion, and kind of so Russia should follow its own way and its own culture and its own beliefs. So yeah, Dostoevsky belonged to the second group of Slavenophile who was pro-Russian and pro-Russian culture. So yeah, this novel at some parts can be also considered problematic with like these conversations, but it's only kind of, I only remember one episode, like at the very end, very end, when Knyaz Myshkin talks about Catholicism. Before that, it's all mostly about kind of Russian people of that time, Russian intelligentsia, thoughts on also religion, thoughts also actually on French Revolution, not so much French Revolution, but guillotine, actually like capital punishment. So there are a lot of very interesting thoughts in this book and ideas expressed here. Answering the question that I asked in the beginning of the video and that I asked in the title and thumbnail of the video, did Dostoevsky fail with this novel? To be honest, I don't think he did. Story-wise, just like the storyline-wise, yes, this book could be improved. Yes, it could be edited. It could definitely benefit from some editing. But like with many truly good books and truly deserving and important works, philosophical works, story is not the most important part of it. Yes, it's important, but it's not the most important. The most important part of a book is a thought behind it, is something that the author wanted to communicate to us as readers. Of course, how he communicates it is important, but authors are also people and they cannot always be perfect. Sometimes life gets into the way, and with this novel, if you read how he was writing it, you will understand that life definitely got in the way. So maybe it's not polished to perfection, but the thought behind this book is truly deserving and is truly important. And the effect that the book produces, at least in my experience, I noticed that whenever I read about Knyaz Myshkin, he made me rethink some of my behavior. He made me analyze what did I do wrong, what mistakes I made, how I could be better. He kind of pushed me to be a better person. And I think that's important. That's really important. If a book pushes you to think and analyze yourself and try to be better, I think it means it's a good book. And just like with the characters in the novel, after they meet Prince Myshkin, like with Keller, for example, you remember that character, the character who wrote that disgusting article about Prince Myshkin. Later on we discover that he is actually a character capable of guilt, capable of accepting his mistake and accepting that he was wrong. General Ivolgin, the one who actually tricked Prince Myshkin at first, who took his money, I mean not much money, but he still took the money, like the only money Prince Myshkin had, and the person who stole later on, by the end of the book he becomes a tragic figure. And so just like in these characters, Prince Myshkin opens positive sides of them, he teaches them things and he shows that they also have good things inside of them. So just like with the characters, I think the reader, even though the reader will encounter Prince Myshkin on the paper, still be a better person after this book, after reading this book. I really think that it will produce that effect on people. At least it did in my experience. It felt good reading this book, you know? It felt good encountering Prince Myshkin and meeting him and reading about him and about his simplicity and just pureness and openness. It felt good reading this book. So That's why I'm saying, yes, the story could be polished, yes, it could be edited, yes, the novel itself in a storyline could be improved, but it is still a very deserving work. It's an important work with a lot of kind and positive and important thoughts behind it. So yes, that's why I'm saying that I don't think that Dostoevsky failed with this novel. I guess it just shows that he is a human. Not all of his works will be polished to perfection. There is a lot of good things in them. I would recommend reading this book. Go into this book with like open mind and prepare yourself that it's more of a philosophical novel rather than novel for like a story, right? It's more of a philosophical work actually. So prepare yourself for a lot of philosophy and thoughts. I would very much like to know your opinion on the novel. If you have read it, what you thought about it. Do you think Dostoevsky failed with this novel, or do you think he actually succeeded? And for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a very good day. I hope you're staying safe, and I will see you soon in my next videos. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.